Hello, coming to you from three very different parts of the world. We are very, very, very pleased to be here today with Miss Andrea Puente Catán and Maestro Miguel Harth-Bedoya. Just a little background here. To introduce you, Andrea Puente Catán has had a multifaceted and diverse career as a professional harpist, accomplished fundraiser, classical music producer, and advocate of Hispanic culture and opera in Spanish. As Major Gifts and Hispanic Affairs Director at San Diego Opera, she oversees the binational Opera en Español initiative that honors, values, and appreciates Hispanic musical heritage. She also plans and executes strategies to build relationships with major donors, media partners, and the San Diego community. She actively promotes and lectures on Spanish opera and on the work of her late husband, opera composer Daniel Catán, at opera houses in the US and Latin America. She was invited to speak at the Opera Latino America conference in August 2019. She served as the principal harpist of several orchestras in Mexico and the US. And as a recipient of a Rockefeller Fellowship, she commissioned and performed works by Mexican and American contemporary composers. Ms. Puente Catán earned an MS in fundraising and grant making at New York University and a Master's of Music from California State University, Los Angeles. And of course, coming to us from Wellington, New Zealand, you win, Maestro. Maestro Miguel Harth-Bedoya is, of course, no stranger to the Fort Worth community. He served as the Fort Worth Symphony Orchestra's music director for 20 remarkable seasons and now holds the position as Director of Orchestral Studies at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Prior to Fort Worth, he held music director positions with the Auckland Philharmonia and Eugene Symphony. He has guest conducted all over the globe, and there's not nearly enough time to list every single orchestra, but trust us, he's been everywhere. We're so proud. So as far as opera goes, though, he has led productions at English National Opera, Bremen Opera, Canadian Opera Company, Minnesota Opera, Cincinnati Opera, and very notably conducted the premiere of Jennifer Higdon's Cold Mountain at Santa Fe Opera. So thank you both so much for being here with us today.
And we are Luis Orozco and
Vanessa Becerra. Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, we're so excited to talk to the both of you. Not only because you're both wonderful musicians on your own careers, but also because I think you're both known for being mentors of Latin American musicians, and just mentors, period. But you've both been known to be mentors of Latin American composers, musicians, conductors throughout your careers. So we really wanted to get both of your perspectives on the topic of how do we get more Latin American composers in our field and opera, specifically in the United States. I think a lot of Latin American composers go to Europe and train over there, and some of them have built some careers over there. But specifically in the United States, I feel like we would all agree that we have a shortage of Latin American works. The Latin American works that I think hold their own place in the repertoire right now are the works of Maestro Catán, deservingly so. And we get a lot of Florencia and Il Postino, and we hope to see more Rappaccini's Daughter and more Sal Si Puedes in the near future. But yeah, we wanted to talk to the both of you about your takes on that topic specifically.
It's a big question, so we just have to break it down in small places. But right off the bat, do either of you have any first impulses about that?
First, I would like to say thank you for inviting us, or for inviting me. Miguel, it's really nice to see you here. You are a symbol of for us to be proud of, proud Hispanic.
Very, very much.
Thank you. I would like to say that, to have a Latin American composer, you need a lot of ingredients, layers. One of those is the relationship between a composer and a conductor. a conductor that would trust and that will believe in the work of a young composer or medium composer or even seasoned composer. You know, composers need that. I would say that in the career of Daniel Catán, he had that along the way. Uh, in Mexico, he had Eduardo Diaz Muñoz really championing his works, and from there he like jumped into the American scene, and then he had some people that believe in his works. I would say that David Gokri, he was not a conductor but was a director of opera of Houston Grand. He believed in his works, and then from there I can name several conductors that believed in this music. So Miguel, why don't I let you talk about this relationship, unique relationship?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Vanessa and Luis, for having me here as well. I always like to start with a disclaimer or a statement, because the most important person in the equation of music making is the composer, is the creator. Because without the creator of music, we wouldn't have anything to perform, singers to sing, and audiences to listen to. So we should never forget that the source of creativity is the most important person to me. And I've never composed anything, so I would never assume that I would know what a composer should do. And that's something that performers, we should also know where we stand. But the partnership, because now it's two ways. See, a book is not a book because it was printed and it sits on the shelf. When somebody reads it, now it becomes a book, truly. So it's the same relation that a creator, a composer, needs to have with anyone or many, performers. And I also want to add, just for the topics of conversation, that my previous visit to the Santa Fe Opera was for the premiere of Osvaldo Golichov's Aina de Mar as well. So I've also had the two different composers' experiences in Santa Fe with a brand new piece. And the best thing for a performer to have from a composer is not the score, because we can get the score from anybody, but is what is not in the score. Mm-hmm. What is the person behind, and the either ambitions or desires or questions that can never be seen in a score. So that becomes really a personal relationship. And people that know people first work better together. I've never seen a combination of business partners, and much less in music, in which the relationship at the human level was not great. So I think there has to be something natural about that symbiosis between a conductor and a composer. Now, it doesn't also mean that we as conductors are capable of conducting any piece of music. That's simply impossible. So we can't be good at everything. So there may be instances in which a relationship with a composer may mean deferring the piece to another conductor. It's totally possible as well. That the fact that I don't conduct all the pieces by my colleagues doesn't mean that I don't like those pieces. There may be a combination, this is beyond my understanding. And for instance, when I performed Aina de Mar also in Los Angeles at Disney Hall, we did a stage version of it. And Esa-Pekka Salonen, who was then the music director, he came to the performance, and he's a composer himself. And he said, "This is fantastic. We should support, the creation and the performances of these composers." And he said personally, "But that's a piece that I'm not capable of conducting." He didn't say I don't like the piece. No, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to hold it against the piece being shared, because ultimately the conductor, if the conductor is in a leadership position, it's a twofold relationship. It's not only performing, but championing and premiering and promoting to others.
Exactly.
I think we have if we see the American houses, yes, you are correct. A lot of the works that Daniel left, which are 4, and then he left a 5th one in English, Meet John Doe. Well, the 4 works like Rappaccini, Florencia, Sal Si Puedes, and Il Postino are played in America. How did that happen? Well, like what I'm telling you, by a conductor believing in this work, but also then you have the director of the company, the executive director, saying, yes, we are going to play an opera in Spanish in America. So, and this happened 25 years ago when the population of Latin people was not so big, not so large. So, the question that you're asking is complex. So one of the layers is the director and the composer. Another layer is the director of the company and what is this person programming and why. Certainly, I do think in this moment in time where we are 49 million people speaking Spanish in the country, in America, it's needed. But I think it's been slowly going towards that. But how many Latin composers do we have that are successful? That's another question. Why haven't they had the chance or not? They have had, that's another question that has to be answered. I cannot answer that question. I know composers that are Latin, and I know that Miguel does too. So we could try to go that way. And then we have this other kind of hybrid model, which are the mariachi operas that are in itself very unique. Not like Puccini or Verdi or, So, Miguel, I don't know, where do you want to navigate with what I just said, but
well, I do have a comment about, because we were talking earlier today actually about Latin American opera in the United States and the rapidly growing Latino population in the United States. And it makes sense for companies to, especially that are in places where the Latino population is a larger group or a group that's growing. It makes sense that they would want to program more works in Spanish. That being said, though, we spoke to Jimmy Lopez earlier about 2 weeks ago, and
composer of Bel Canto, which premiered at the Opera of Chicago in 2015.
And he had some really interesting things to say, and it's about shifting the paradigm of programming contemporary opera. And he posed a question to me that I really hadn't thought about. He said, well, what is Latin American opera? He said, I think we have to change the mindset of what we think Latin American opera should sound like, because then in doing that, we're just boxing people up again. But I do think people that, to just use an example of Minnesota opera, a place that presumably I don't actually know what the Latino population in Minneapolis is. I don't think is as big as San Diego, for example. But they do program a lot of contemporary opera. And I think even for a place that doesn't have a large Latino community, it's still very educational for that community to see some of those works. I mean, in Cincinnati, I lived in Cincinnati for a long time. And Maestro, I think, did you conduct the Aina de Mar there as well?
Yes, I did.
And I can't remember what year that was, but people are still talking about it right now. And I wouldn't necessarily say that Cincinnati has a large Latin American community, but that's still one of the works that the folks at Cincinnati Opera are still, it just really stuck with people.
Yeah, contemporary opera. So I think we have different kinds of contemporary opera. And if we talk about opera, are we gonna keep the format of the 19th century, very definite format that we have, that we all know, it opens with an orchestral piece and then it goes into the introduction of the characters, and then either you have an aria or a duet or a quartet, and then have another interlude, and so on. Or we're talking about the new hybrids. We have, we have operas like the Beth Morrison projects that are very contemporary and very definite in one kind of language, I would say, So I don't know. I think we can also go into Latin America and see what they are doing. So one of the things that me was important in this Latin American convention that they had with opera houses was to talk about, we have to have the responsibility in Latin America to present these works not only of music but of literature. We are sitting in a mountain of gold with I don't know how many incredible novels and writers because we have them.
Yeah.
So what are we gonna do with that? So so that's another layer of it. But San Diego Opera is commissioning a work by a Peruvian American composer, Gabriela Elena Frank, and the libretto is by Nilo Cruz. He's Cuban, and that's an effort of the company to do contemporary opera and to have a new opera about Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. So I will give it to you, Miguel, from here on.
Before I forget, Chilean composer Sebastián Errázuriz, who currently lives in Frutillar in the south of Chile, he has composed a couple of operas, and the last one that the Teatro Municipal in Santiago did was Viento Blanco. I don't think that piece has left Chile yet, but before I forget, yes, there are efforts elsewhere. So I want to address a few topics here, which has to do audience and product. And I've been a foreigner all my life. I've not left really I've not lived in Peru beyond my secondary education. And even though I was director of the Philharmonic in the 90s, I was coming and going, from New York. So I've been out of place, let's put it the way, all the time, everywhere. So I've been a minority all the time. I've been Latino all the time because that's who I am. So ultimately, does that make me any special? No, I hope not. I hope what makes me special is because I can do something well. So, but what happens when I do German music? Is it less German than the Germans, or is it not for the Germans? If I do German music, should be for non-Germans. So it's quite complex. The question of citizenship of the artist and the product and the recipient. So, for instance, if Peruvian food is amazing. I mean, it's amazing. But if you live in Peru and you go to Madrid, sure, you can go and have one of the best Peruvian foods there as well. But you're not going to do that because that's what you normally do. You do it all the time. So the question is, as an audience, do I want to hear something different that I'm normally accustomed to? Do I want to hear something in the language that I don't know? Because now there are subtitles and I can understand any language. I can follow. So that's something not to forget, that who is the audience, or is it for the art itself because it has value, that it has a relevance. For instance, one of the things you mentioned, Nilo Cruz, who also wrote the libretto for Bel Canto, is the word, is the content of the libretto, which many a times gets forgotten. Yeah, who's the composer? Yeah, who wrote the libretto? Because unless it was Wagner that had major issues with his own librettos, and we all have it to this date, but for good or for bad, the word, see, that's the biggest difference between abstract music, such as instrumental music, symphonic music, and the word is specific to something. So the message and the content, because for instance, is Il Postino, is it a Latin American work? Is it not? Is the content what matters, or the delivery form? So
I think, Daniel would talk about this, the universality of music a lot.
There we go. Exactly.
But also he was concerned about really presenting these Latin American works and the Latin American way of thinking and feeling in a way. We are all humans, yes, we feel the same, but there is something about the language and the cadence of the language, and it's beautiful. And I think we have an opportunity. We're in a moment of opportunity in America, and I think Daniel started this thing, and now it's open, and now we just have to get into this wave.
And how, as two people in a position that have both been in education and in the arts, what are some of the challenges that, because opera producing and opera composing is quite difficult, and I think it can seem, I would imagine, again, like Miguel said, I'm not a composer, so it's hard for me to imagine how daunting it must be to write a work so multifaceted. can be done at the educational level and at the company level to facilitate and maybe to get some of the composers interested in going towards that outlet? Composers that maybe are going more towards symphonic works or more towards cinematic works. I mean, we asked Jimmy the same question, and and he had a very practical answer. He said, well, not everybody's good at writing operas, so there's also
hard. It's hard.
How do you know? Yeah, but how do you know? So I think one simple way that has existed over time, particularly in the last 50 years or so, is by creating programs in the fashion of workshops that are supervised by institutions, either orchestras or opera companies or joint, or universities as well, in which you have to train your composers early on to do this. So you start with small forms. Maybe you partner with the literature department and maybe somebody there, or maybe with the theater department, somebody that can create a small libretto. So start somewhere small. Just to write a song is equally hard to write something like an oratorio, because you only have 3 minutes to write something good. And maybe creating these platforms that you can partner with and to see what emanates out of that concoction of elements, and just let it see, rather than committing, oh, yeah, we're going to go blind and commission this person this. But I've never even written for harp. For instance, if you want to write, I don't even know that there are 7 pedals in the harp. I don't know which one goes on the left, which one, that type of thing. Yes, exactly. Yeah, you wrote actually for piano. This doesn't work in the harp, and things like that. You understand?
Yeah.
So the same for guitar. The same for, so people need to get into it. At least they have to learn early on to see whether it's for them to develop and continue or not. So creating this, and also maneuvering languages. For instance, I was conducting in Madrid, was it 2 years ago, and I got to see Kaya Sariajo's Only the Sound Remains at the Teatro Real, which only was for 2 singers, and Philip Jaruski was one of them. And this actually didn't need an orchestra. It had a string quartet with a vocal quartet and a percussion ensemble, which kept me fascinating the entire time, because every sound and every word was unique. And so it didn't matter that it was in the language that it was in English actually, but the audience was Spanish largely. So now you have, but then there's not an issue anymore to hear something in a different language. But what I was getting to, it was the unexpected, the topic, the sonorities, the way it was delivered vocally. And when I find a composer that can do that, it's most likely the composer has tried it out before. It's steps by steps. Or like cooking, I want to see how these ingredients come up with if I mix them. You're not going to do that when you have guests and never tried it before. So the trying is part of it.
Definitely, you need composers that have done vocal writing many times. So then, because you have to know about the voice, the passaggio, and all that. I would like to add to this mix. There's the board in an opera company that has to decide things.
Right.
That also is there. The community that you are sitting in, because you have to consider the community, if it's, what's the percentage demographically. So who are you serving? That's also very important. That's why, your question, Luis, about these opera companies that are, I guess they're in I'm sure they're in the south of the States, in the border, close to the border to Mexico. It makes more sense because the population have more Hispanics. But I think I find it quite fascinating understanding Hispanic culture or Hispanic life through the operas, and that has happened with Il Postino, with Florencia, this magic realism or whatever it is, the poetry of Neruda, or so I find it fascinating that we have this moment. So several things have to happen at the same time, so this has some drive.
I'm curious, how did you get to know Gabriela Lena Franken? Because that seems like that's exactly the experiment that we're wanting to happen more and more, is for the company to emphasize and prioritize programming a new piece, make sure that it's by a Latina and and partnered. The story is also by, he's Cuban, so there's like the sensibilities all there. So that's exactly, I think, this like magical concoction that we're referring to. So I guess I'm curious, what was the first step then? Did you know Gabby first, and then
Well,
what can we mimic?
Yeah, so I'm not the director of San Diego Opera. I work for San Diego Opera and
Right.
director of hispanic initiatives. But this was brought by our executive director, David Bennett, and he was interested in commissioning a new work. And the San Diego Opera is located 15 minutes away from the border of Mexico. And Frida Kahlo being such an iconic symbol, or woman in this case, I think that's how it went. Then also the publisher had conversations with him. That's Schirmer, is the same publisher as Daniel. So once again, multi-layered.
Yeah.
And and then you have these librettists, which is amazing librettists, and then deciding who can be the stage director of this piece. We have a Peruvian American, we have a Cuban, but this happens in Mexico. What are we going to do? So he considered having a Mexican stage director, so on. So I think Miguel really hit it at the core of having institutions partner and creating programs so this can happen.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think,
yes. And I've known Gabby since 99 or 2000, because she was early on one of my composers in residence in Fort Worth. And I mean, many composers that we started together, have moved up together and grown together. And also, sorry, the partnership that I mentioned earlier, the other one benefit is that we can grow together as artists if you maintain this continuous path. Yes.
Yeah. And something too that I think a lot of composers, that it's important, especially from the educational level of, when they learn how to write a song and when they start just writing for the voice period, is, are they in an institution where they have readily access to voices? And something that has always struck me about Maestro Catán's music is how singable it is. And I don't know how much access he had when he was writing to actual voices, but everything that I've sung, at least, has been quite approachable. So yeah, I was wondering about that.
So, in the case of Daniel Catán, he would do anything to get a singer in the house and sing his stuff. And we had workshops and sing this for me, and how about you side read with me and tell me if this comfortable is not comfortable, and then let's have dinner together. There was always this social component. It's not that he had in the university singers. He was looking for singers to try out things, same as instrumentalists. We always had my colleagues, my friends, violinists or clarinetists or cello or name it. They were in the house and we would try things, or we would put up some workshops. Like in the case of Il Postino, the tenor that workshop Il Postino some scenes was Daniel Montenegro. He was not at the beginning of the premiere or anything like that, but he was there in Los Angeles. He was like, okay, we're gonna have this workshop. So it's a matter of collaboration. A composer cannot compose by himself. He does, but he needs to try out his things, of course.
Yeah. Experimenting with all the different combinations and flavors, like you said.
Yeah. But notation, alluding now to the singable, is it singable or is it for the voice? Well, you have to define what's singable by the standards of different composers, because if you ever want to do Pierrot Lunaire, which is the classic of,
of Schoenberg.
Right, exactly, of the second Viennese school, but then it's a particular way of the definition of singing. But when we were in the production of Aina Damar, no one in the cast spoke Spanish. And I realized only then, and fortunately enough, we had Nico Castel as the Spanish coach. And I learned so much from his diction in Spanish that came in so handy later to open the doors, because people that speak English and sing in Spanish can have a very hard time, right? And so And I realized that that also needed to be, that ice needed to be broken from the speaking, pronunciation, singing point of view. But then I also saw, you know, Osvaldo Golijov trying out things with Don Upshaw that other singers actually cannot do exactly. Right. So he needed to figure out a way that the notation, if I notate this, does it mean it's black and white? Because in notation also has limitations.
Yeah.
You know, so it was a fascinating way, because ultimately what gets left behind is the score. Yes, there may be recordings, but then the more versions you have, the more confusing it can get, because you don't want, you know, you don't want to be a copy of anybody.
I would like to add, for example, I had an experience of Florencia en el Amazonas in Colombia. And, you know, when I heard the recitative, the spoken sang word, wow, I was like, what did you guys do? Well, what did the guys do? I mean, these people speak Spanish and know the so they were not so worried about if it was 16 notes or 8 notes. They were doing it naturally. And I saw there then that these recitatives were very, very close to the language. And that was very, very comforting and nice and beautiful experience. So yes, the coach, for example, it's essential.
Another thing that Jimmy said that really, as I told you guys already, that he asked me, well, what is Latin American opera? You know, and I think that's something worth talking about. I think we have, you know, there are things like Maria de Buenos Aires, which is probably the most produced opera in Spanish in America.
Operita.
Operita. But that's where I was going. It's hard to really call that an opera, and I will say this in the front end of this, but I do think there is obviously a place for the mariachi operas, and I think they've been wildly successful for a reason. I think they absolutely have a place in the repertoire. Do I think they're operas? Maybe not in the sense that I think of as an opera. I think they're fantastic pieces of theater, musical theater, and I will say, before I even saw it, I was curious about it, and sitting in the hall, the moment the mariachi sound hits, as somebody who grew up in Mexico, it was very effective. I mean, even if I was fighting it, like, there was no way of fighting it. You know, like, I immediately felt it. I was immediately taken to a place that was very special for me. That being said, I think what I would like to see is more works in the line of Catán. And I keep referring to Catán because really we have nobody like him at the moment, I would say. I think the Latin American voice is a very new voice in this country in comparison to a lot of other ethnic groups. So I am hopeful that this is just the beginning for us. But I do wonder if, you know, as Maestro talked about the composer in Chile, if there are any other voices that we should be keeping out on the radar. I know we spoke earlier about Juan Pablo Contreras, who I admittedly didn't actually know his music until Jimmy told us about him. And I checked out some of his stuff and just immediately found myself asking, I was like, why is this guy not writing opera? I loved his music.
We're waiting.
Well, I wonder if now, with the new options that the challenging times have given us, you know, through the pandemic, and I wonder if we should explore. See, this is a great time to think and try rather than perform, because we cannot really perform for live audiences for a while. But maybe, and I'm not sure what it is that I'm coming up with, but thinking whether these platforms can allow us to connect composers, even musicians, librettists, to start thinking about it and producing tests of some sort or trials.
I would like to
Yeah.
say something else. You know, like in Latin America, living from composing is not easy. If it's not easy in the States, in Latin America, is more merely. I would like to say that
Mhm.
we do have some composers in Mexico that work that have written opera, like Luis uh, Enrique González Medina or Gaby Ortiz. You know, it's more an instrumental composer, orchestral, but she has written a couple of operas, and but there's also that consideration. You know, it's like, okay, they're gonna write operas, and who's gonna premiere them, and are they gonna live from that? So, and that's always a question for a composer. Even in America, when they pay their composers fairly okay,
Yeah.
they don't live out from that. They have to
Yeah.
have another source of income, which is teaching or writing for movies or r- name it. So
Yeah.
that's another thing. But yes, we are in a moment that I think, yes, Miguel, we should use this time, which in a way I think all of us are trying to connect with others, to see what others are doing. I was very pleased to listen to some of Brazilian composer, last name Ripper.
Mhm.
Beautiful music, like beautiful. So there are some people that are doing things that are
Yeah.
considerable. Now, how do we bridge them with American?
Yeah.
That's why I went there, you know, like my director said, okay, let's have a Opera en Español initiative. What are we gonna do with this? And it's binational, and we're going step by step,
Yeah.
relating with another country.
Yeah.
So
Even if we had all this material that we hope comes and is transpires out of even something like this, the next question is what we mentioned before about companies and the leadership at those companies who choose to program these sorts of stories,
yeah,
and the audience are they, I mean, Fort Worth Opera, for instance, I think that they programmed the mariachi operas because they knew that this is the community that hopefully will see itself reflected. But then at the same time, as we mentioned, that's giving them just a tiny taste of what opera is. And so what's the next step is to program.
no, and you know what? The mariachi operas have their own place, and
Mhm.
if we talk about the transformation of art in a person, you feel that with these operas, and you understand the problems of immigration, and they are hard and they are close to your heart if you are Latin and you have people that you know that have crossed, and the difficulties that there are. And I think having a transformative art as opera is it's key. Okay, it's not Puccini, but they are serving the community. I don't know if what do you think, Miguel, about this, but they have their own place.
Absolutely, like zarzuelas do, operettas, as I mentioned in our private conversation before, El Condor Pasa, for instance, that what is it, a theater piece, a zarzuela, but you actually need singers and a chorus, and that piece is already over 100 years old, and some of the music, it's still the most memorable all around. But definitely, I think feeling represented, it's a good feeling,
Mhm.
particularly these days. But at the same time, we have a lot more options to feel represented by doing things rather than by waiting for others to do things to represent this and that. Because I'm an equal American citizen, because I've lived in the US a little over half of my life, but I also spent 10 years in New Zealand, so I'm partially a Kiwi to this country. And so I think when we find a sense of belonging wherever it is, that's when societies are at best as communities. And
Yeah.
I think that other institutions such as museums can find ways to become more active in something that is life rather than things that are permanent. And there could be good avenues to foster partnerships
Mhm.
for the creativity of new operas, or whether opera is the word that it's going to remain. If we look at the following, probably not in the opera field so much, but in the concert setting. If we go back 200 years ago, there were very few concerts to start with. Concerts took an enormous amount of effort to produce, and they would last 4 or 5 hours, and people would come and go and this stuff. of thing. And then suddenly I was thinking, when was the intermission invented? When and why? Well, the why could be either we need to sell alcohol or people go to the restrooms or something like that. But it became a thing. Oh, now there is an intermission, but there wasn't an intermission. There were not program books handed. Now there are apps. So in other words, the music making, it's still the same. We still need to learn it, practice, compose it, all of it. And what is being adapted is how we are channeling this to deliver it to an audience. If you think about when recordings came into existence, musicians didn't come up with that. Musicians were saying, no, 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 no. They won't come to hear us anymore. And now it's a normal thing. Now we have it, doesn't matter. Then streaming came along. No, 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 no. But we have recordings. Recordings are going to suffer because of streaming. Yeah, but see, I think artists and musicians need to be more in the forefront of thinking about this, because iTunes and other things have not been thought by artists and musicians. And that's why we sort of keep being pushed and we need to catch up with things. So the more we involve artists in thinking about these things, I think the more beneficial the creation of works will happen. Definitely, I'm very convinced about that.
No, and I also think, Miguel and Vanessa and Luis, that this pandemic has given us that opportunity to all of the opera houses and to all of us that are concerned with this art form. Now we are like moving slowly, like saying, oh, we can do this differently a little bit. I'm sure we're gonna go back to theater at some point, but it has given us the opportunity to think about this in a different way and go up the technology wave that we needed to be. Because opera, think about it, 200 years ago, it was at the forefront of technology, like flying things or that. And so this is a moment. So I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm very optimistic. I think the 21st century, as I call it, is Latin American's turn if we get our act together.
Yeah, and something, I don't know, something that you alluded to earlier, we are sitting on a gold mine of stories. As far as Latin American history and as far as Latin American literature, we have one of the most dramatic, if you put Latin America all together, we have one of the most dramatic histories in the world.
Operatic.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, absolutely.
I was talking to somebody that was on staff with the Florida Grand Opera a few years ago, and he was saying that he gets the question of, what are you doing to reach out to your Latin American community? Like, what are you programming to reach out to your Latin American community? And he had an answer that I really sympathize with quite a bit. He said, well, which Latin American community? Because I can't reach my Cuban Latin American community with this kind of music. Perhaps I can't reach my Venezuelan community with that kind of music. And it really, there is a danger, and not to keep harping on the mariachi operas, but there is a danger to take one kind of work and say, well, this is what's going to appeal to all Latin America or to all my community, to my whole community.
But there's a commonality, and that's the language within Latin America. We all speak Spanish. And if you have a work in Spanish, then it becomes for all. And that's how I see it. It's my personal view, but I see it like that. Whether it's more Mexican or more, more Colombian or more Ecuadorian or more Paraguayan or more, And then if you think about the Latin American music it's a mix. I mean, I cannot think about Latin American music without the African drumming.
Totally.
Right.
Exactly.
Like it's impossible. So me, the commonality in opera is the language. And then we have all these different composers from Peru, from Chile, from, I think language unifies us.
Yes, and the other one I call Portuñol, because you can make up.
Yes.
You can make up, but still it's very close to us. Yes, and that's the question of identity at the end. Is the composer Also, does the composer want to be a composer because he or she are composers, not because they are from a particular place? For instance, Jennifer Higdon, just to give you an example, you know, one day, I don't know, 10 years ago, and she told me when we were in a production of something, when did I become a woman composer? Suddenly I'm a woman composer, you know, and I'm, you know,
Right.
What happened? I'm the same. I've not changed, you know. Oh, because you represent, you know, LGBT. I'm not doing anything. I'm who I am. So there's also that we from the outside tend to give boundaries or titles or to sometimes it's to explain, yes, to explain or to represent, but it's also when you look at the other side, they suddenly don't realize that, oh, I didn't know I was just a good composer, you know.
I think that, you know, like if you listen to Daniel's works, are they really Latin American? Well, they have a tint, but truly, if you didn't know who this composer was and you close your eyes, you wouldn't say he was Latin American.
And it wouldn't matter. It really, I don't think it matters anymore. Yeah, and there's been a dilemma for a long time, you know, trying to write something that represents who you are from. Then why on earth did Brahms write Hungarian dances and stuff like? So if you start thinking about that, then better not, because it's just too complicated to try to. That's the beauty of music. It's about the music. It's not about the music.
And also we are a mix, you know, we are a mix, a person with all these influences of music, you know, from all over the world. Whether you live in the States or in Costa Rica, or you live in Russia, you know, like you have all these different things that you're listening to. I don't only you listen to Latin American music, or only listen to classical music, or only listen, you know, I have a world of influences. And a composer, imagine, 10 times more, 100 times more.
Yeah. Yes, something that I found very powerful that Jimmy said was, I don't know if it's about needing more Latin American opera, it's about needing more Latinos in opera. And there is something to be said about if you can eliminate that problem of, well, how do I reach to this specific community, or how do I reach this specific community? If you start having a variety of people in leadership positions and advising positions with companies, with educational institutions, and with composers, and the more voices you add from Latin America, the more diverse of music and works that you're going to get, and then you can potentially eliminate that problem of, you know, how do I reach out to this specific community?
Yeah, I think you know, like I've been doing these programs called Opera en tu Sofá. They're kind of, and so what I've been doing is we present opera, a singer singing opera, a young singer from Mexico in this case, because it's part of the binational thing, initiative. But also they sing either a song, un bolero, una zarzuela, you know, name it. And it is hybrid in a way. And for us, it's a way also of sharing the culture, and for the audience to understand, or to hear, to listen to new things that they have never heard, but they have been there for more than 100 years. So, you know, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah,
sharing
it's
culture, sharing the songs, sharing the poetry, sharing.
Telling the stories,
building bridges.
And it's very interesting how versatile some of that music is. I think I'm putting together a recital, and I wanted to put a couple of medleys, an idea that I admittedly stole from Javier Camarena, but he does you know, Oteo medleys, Grever medleys, Lara medleys, and all these composers of popular Mexican music that can be so easily translated into for lack of a better word, a classical music setting, you know, and it's so much of that old folklore Latin American music is so versatile on how it can be presented.
It's very melodic. It's very easy to listen to. You know, people love it. It's part of our culture. So we share it as an American person can share Frank Sinatra song. You know,
Right.
why
Yeah.
not? Great. We need to nurture, to be nurtured by all cultures, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my heart is hopeful knowing that we have people like you two, and as leaders in the Hispanic community in music, in our art form. And Maestro Bedoya, I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak about it because I thought it was really cool, about your new position in Omaha,
Yes.
and the undergrad position. I was wondering if you'd be willing to speak on that.
Well, thank you. I've waited for a long time, particularly for acquiring experience, as in not just mileage of conducting, but real music experience, to be able to share it properly. And this is something that has been going through my mind for decades. But when I was in my 30s, it didn't feel right. When I was in my 40s, so now that I've just passed 50 a couple of years ago, and I've conducted for over 30 years, is that, okay, now it feels a little more comfortable. And so at the University of Nebraska in Omaha, we have created the undergrad in orchestral conducting, which has disappeared from the US pretty much in the last 20 years, and which doesn't allow students to really study solidly in a foundation, including languages, because when you only study for 2 years and you only speak one language, that's going to limit your possibilities of even thinking of operas, of standard operas, not even any other, you know, new style of opera. So yeah, I'm very excited about that. I already have 2 students that are 20 years old, and you know, they'll do their degree there, and from then they can move on. And the training also allows the variety of repertoire from the very beginning. So in other words, you don't have to wait to study symphonies until you study oratorios, until you study operas. You can study all of it in parallel forms nowadays. And I'm just very, very happy doing it. And I hope that that can, you know, influence the new generation of thinkers as well, because part of what I'm training them is to think, not just only to do, because all musicians nowadays need to be told what to do with what they know, because just playing the violin good enough may not be, you know, the only thing that they have to think about or be trained or learn what to do.
That
Yeah.
sounds
So
wonderful.
exciting.
Yeah.
Love it.
Bravo.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And you're still in Fort Worth, and your family is still in Fort Worth?
Yes,
Is that
we
what you
still have
mentioned?
2 children
Okay,
that are finishing school, high school. We have our oldest daughter in college already, went to Baylor. So I commute, and works out just fine. Yes.
Okay, good. Great to hear.
That's awesome. It was a pleasure. Such a pleasure talking to you both.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving us this space, and we'll see.
We're gonna solve the the opera problem.
This time next year we'll have it figured out. I bet. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. It was a true pleasure.
New Zealand.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll keep you posted.
Please do.
Bye.
Bye.